now that we've heard all of you, what does it really take to create what I'd call a market-driving enterprise as opposed to a market-driven enterprise? Now, so that in some ways, what Mr. Biyani was saying, you could keep on reinventing yourself every now and then. It's hard. He makes it sound easy, but it's hard for most companies to do that. Now, what are the levers that you can press? What are the things that could help you build that kind of culture so that you can kind of make disruption a part of your DNA? And I'll come to you, Sanjay. When you kind of plan your slightly more disruptive ideas, one of the big constraints, and I've heard this from the likes of Dr. Ramcharan, is that organizations don't always have the leadership bench to really put on their, kind of the big, ambitious, bold projects. How did you kind of go about picking leaders who would lead these projects? What do you look for when you kind of unleash a new disruptive organization, so that one gets a bit of an idea of what it takes to pick leadership really to lead projects?
It's a very, very valid point that you raised, Indrajit. I think one of the biggest challenges that you face when you're opening a new business sector, almost a new disruption, the rules of the game are very different, and the current organization has learned to play with certain rules, and unless you are in your mind willing to give up those rules and play with the new rules is difficult. And you need to find those people who are either within your team or from outside. Ideally, I think in most of the cases, you have to find leaders, possibly outside the current set of people, to really find somebody to lead that business who is inherently capable of challenging the current rules of the business. So I'll give you an example of our own Hotstar. When we started this business, the pricing of our content is a very important, very core decision that we have. And I think our current mindset of TV is, if you give it to a DTH platform, you charge X rupees of money. And that is a must if you have to deal with us as a content company. Right. But in digital space, when a consumer is consuming this content, especially if you're paying for your 3G or 4G charges, with 30 minutes a day, you spend 1800 rupees already on consuming that content. How do you do pricing in this case? And we decided to go free and say it is ad-led model, because consumer is already paying 1800 rupees a month. You can't be now charging another 100 rupees because that will create friction. So if we had played with the rules of the game, which were TV rules, the answer would have been very different. And I think the answer finally lied in, first, our ability as a management team to really play by the different rules, and second, the team that was put together, which was almost, our digital team is a non-television team. Okay. Their past experience on television is almost zero. So they're coming and questioning every aspect of this business. And the decision that they come up to say, why don't you look at it this way, is very different from if you were to put a person in the job who has run the TV business for a long, long time. So I think fundamentally that's the big difference. How do you find the right mindset so they can challenge the rules of the game in a very different way?
Right. Thanks for that. Mr. Biyani, I'll come to you. When you talk about disruption, at the same time, folks in your organization will constantly look for some anchors, some continuity amidst the change. It's the way the human mind is wired, as it were, right? But you've kind of constantly pushed the envelope, tried to do new things. How did you kind of balance the two of embracing change, but at the same time keeping an element of continuity? Is that important?
I think it's very important, and to be honest, we looked at the human brain and the left side and the right side of the brain. One is the creative side, the aesthetic side, and one is the visual side, the right side of the brain, and the left side of the brain, the logical side, the rational side, the analytical side. How can you create an organization which can work on both sides of the brain together? And when we created an organization design recently, we looked at the concept of creation and control. How can creation and control happen at the same time? And what are the elements which are control related and what are the elements which are creation related? And that's how we designed our organization. And I believe that's helping us to do creation and control at the same time. Control is the continuity with the processes which have to be repeated again and again. And that can be seen from a very different lens. And the creation process also, you need to now quantify your creation with timelines, with schedules, with each and everything. So we brought in this discipline. And I believe that's helping us to do both things at the same time. It's a very, very difficult exercise to do. Everybody just doesn't get it. And for that, we have to make the organization much younger. And that's what we are currently doing. We have got 100 trainees who don't have any history of the past, who have come into the organization. We've created a chairman's club. The people who can change and work on both sides of the brain, we got them into the mainstream. So it's been an exercise which is still going on. And I believe that's very important to bring in new energy into the organization to bring about a change like this.
Very interesting that Mr. Biyani talked about the beginner's mindset and the intellectual curiosity to learn. In your experience, how do you view that, the whole idea of intellectual curiosity and embedding that into the DNA of the organization? How important is it today? Especially the point he was making about getting young people in.
I think Mr. Biyani needs to be complimented for the fact that he is one of the few leaders who's looking upon his organization as a living human being which has a left brain and a right brain, much like any one of us. So compliments to him. The second thing that I would say is that he also mentioned that he has this whole army of people, a whole set of dedicated people who are out there pursuing this mission of his. That's very, very good. The thing that I would recommend in this case is how do you go forward is that it just doesn't require the mindset is fine, but then it requires a transformational mindset. And what I mean by transformational mindset is a couple of things that are happening, and unless we realize that, we are going to be in trouble. So let me just say three things. First is, according to me, and this is in my opinion, business plans are dead. And what is going to replace business plan is customer plan. What is the reason? Whenever you have a business plan, you only think in terms of measurement device, return on equity, return on capital employed, return on asset. That's how you measure the performance. Now, I think that's dead. What we got to start doing is building an entire customer plan, and the matrix that will decide the customer plan is customer engagement, customer stickiness, brand advocacy score, net promoter score, etc. Why am I saying that? The moment you shift your entire focus from a business plan to a customer plan, and the moment these metrics start showing up, your return on equity, etc. will obviously follow. It's like the body and a tail. Wherever the body goes, the tail will follow. So that's one. The second big shift that's happening, which we haven't discussed, is millennials. People who are born between 1982 to 2000, they are totally different animals on both sides, both as employees and as customers. What do they want? As employees, they want to engage with companies who have a higher purpose than just making money. And as customers, they want to support those companies which have a higher, higher purpose. By 2025, majority of people, both as employees and as customers, are going to be these millennials.
Sure.
Has the organization changed to take them on board, their thinking, etc.? I fear most of the organizations haven't. And therefore, I would just like to say one thing, that if there is one mantra that we can follow is this, and this is as old as the hill, is let's be customer focused and not be competitor focused. And what is hastening this entire thing is this thing called technology. Now, technology based on 4 pillars of SMAC: social, mobile, apps and analytics, and cloud. Based on this, the entire power has shifted from a brand owner onto the customer. Like Sanjay was saying, today customer decides when he has to see it, what he wants to see it on a device of his choice. So my only recommendation would be that to gain competitive advantage, we have to be customer focused. Second, we have to realize who our customer is and who our employees will be. And number 3, in terms of business plan, I'm very, very, very passionate about that. Business plan is dead. We got to be focusing on customer plan.
Sure. So it's almost like another new version of sense and respond, as it were. If you have the ability to sense what's going on in the consumer's world, and an ability to respond to them in the best way possible. Sorry.
Yeah. See, the whole point is what? I just want to build on what Mr. Biyani said. He took the discussion of brain and restricted it because of time constraint, I'm sure, to an organization. I'm saying that if you or any organization wish to get competitive advantage in today's dynamic and disruptive environment, you have to do 2 things. First is use behavioral sciences understand why people behave the way they do, and then build it into your business model. Amazon is one classical example. The second thing, and I'm saying it with a lot of passion, that we got to understand the human brain. And if we understand the human brain and we are able to change human behavior, then things will work out like magic for any organization. I'll just take only one example. How do you bring about a change in human behavior? Most organizations are only focusing on neocortex, which is giving them rational reason to buy, consume their content. Forget that. First, look at what is in the interest of customers and tell them. So first touch their emotions. Once you touch people's emotion, then it will change their behavior, and once it changes their behavior, then give them a rational reason to buy your product.
Sure.
So these are my recommendation as to how to cope with today's time.
Sure, thanks. Rishi, I'd come to you. I think Mr. Biyani talked about the whole idea of discipline execution, and I know Sanjay has some views on that as well. We often associate radical innovation with a slightly chaotic kind of process, which it needn't necessarily be. And I think if Apple is any evidence, or Amazon's any evidence, it can be a very or Google for that matter, they systematically, I think, bring about disruptive innovation. You've studied in your book, you talked about how difficult it is for Indian organizations to do radical innovation. What are the things that they could learn from the Western models of innovation, if at all?
I think there are several things Indian companies could do to embrace more radical innovation. I think the first thing they need to do is encourage much more experimentation. I think there's a fear of failure that's holding back many organizations from doing a lot more experiments. And many times in this very changing digital world, you can't simply by analytical methods determine whether a particular thing is going to work or not. So unless you're willing to try it out, and the good news is that again in the digital space, experimentation is not all that expensive. So you can do many more experiments than before, as long as you're not scared to fail and you're willing to sort of move on even if something doesn't work out. So I'm quite fond, for example, of the ideas propounded in the Lean Startup, which really talks about this willingness to experiment, and then if things don't work out, pivot and try something else. I think we need to be able to adapt that kind of thinking much more even into our large organizations. Small organizations do that almost by necessity because otherwise they won't survive. But in our larger organizations, we need to embrace that kind of thinking. What that also means is we need to have more resources available in the organization for experimentation and testing. We need to give people more time and space in their work environment so that they can try these things out. Managers, for example, need to be evaluated based on how much flexibility and how much time and space they give people who report to them so that they have time for experimentation. And we also need to look at ways to train people to be more innovative in the workplace. I think many people are very creative almost inherently, but sometimes they don't know how to translate that creativity into innovation in their work sphere. And there are lots of good techniques like design thinking that was mentioned earlier, sure, or lateral thinking, or several others that could help people translate their inherent creativity into innovation in the workplace.
Thanks so much. Sanjay, I'll come to you. I know we've kind of discussed this once, the whole idea of execution. Does it get enough importance in this whole idea of doing blue sky thinking and all of that, but getting things done and making innovation really happen? What are your thoughts on that? What is your experience?
Build on what you said and Mr. Biyani said. First thing, I think creativity or disruption can only happen on the back of serious discipline. It is not that you do blue sky thinking and suddenly the biggest idea will come. So I think, and this is something which we do as a business. We are in the business of creating content which disrupts hopefully very regularly, whether it is Satyamev Jayate or Kabaddi. And I think one of the basic principles is being disciplined around it. The second principle is being consumer focused, which is about saying that you don't lose sight of, in a very real terms, who you're catering to. And the results are an outcome, whether it is viewership, revenue, profits are an outcome of how focused are you creating engaging enough product and content. And third, I think, which is really important, is betting the house big. I think which is the DNA of our company, including our 21st Century Fox, that if you believe in something, then really go out and put enough might behind it. so that you've tested it well enough. And to me, honestly, one of the examples that we feel very proud about is Kabaddi as a sport. In the last 1 year, it is one sport which has been watched by almost 50-60 crore people every time it has come on air. The number of young and old urban people who are watching it is quite phenomenal. The number of people who are watching it on digital is even more staggering. Around 25 million people viewed it on mobile phones this year on Hotstar. And it tells you that discipline, consumer focus, and betting the house big.
How does discipline kind of come into the way that you kind of work?
I think to think about a concept, it can't be that somebody sits in a blue space, has a cup of coffee, and then the idea gets created. It's about looking at what consumers need in a very disciplined way, understanding the needs of the consumers in a more sharper way. What can this business deliver? So it's a lot of science and rigor which goes into a concept which is being created, be it Satyamev Jayate or be it Kabaddi. I think the process of effort or amount of effort which has gone in to sharpen the concept has taken a few years. Satyamev Jayate took 3 years in the making. Kabaddi has been 2 years in the making before you saw the first thing on air, including how you package it, how you position it, how you market it, how much do you invest. So fundamentally, I think discipline and execution is key to making an idea big.
Right. Right. In fact, that's what I wanted to come to Mr. Biyani as well, because the last time we spoke about this, you stressed on this whole issue of execution and how you're kind of trying to get better and better at making things happen, because great ideas are fine, but if they don't have the same kind of impact in the marketplace, it amounts to nothing, the point that Sanjay was making. Tell us what your experience has been of late in what it takes to understand that execution game better.
I think I admitted earlier that we were majorly into a creation phase, and we were able to build many concepts, many prototypes, and going live with the consumers, but we were still very successful. But I think when you have to really make money out of every of your idea, it is the discipline and execution which was required, and probably I didn't have that. And at that time, I happened to read the book Execution by Ramcharan, and I said, I will need a coach and a mentor here to see how do I learn execution, because execution is a lot about discipline, and being in the creation side of business, I think that discipline and that rigor probably was not there into me. And I think I had to reinvent myself to get into reviews, get into sitting into the meeting whole day on a particular subject. I think that's which I never used to do. Now today, 15 days a month, I am only into getting into the rigor of execution and seeing how execution is being done. I think it's been a big shift for me. All my first 20 years of my career, I was majorly into creation and execution and watching it from the side. I think now creation and execution and watching it right into it. I think it's been a long journey.
Right, right. Rishi, I wanted to come to you with this whole issue that Mr. Biyani was talking about, that he himself has to now invest a considerable amount of time, at least 15 days a month, he said, on tracking progress, doing reviews and becoming better at execution. But we've also seen quite a few Indian companies, I mean, Cognizant is one that comes to mind and you're familiar with them, where they've tried to separate the two roles, where they have a CEO who's doing the more market making stuff in terms of reimagining the more frontier areas, and leaving maybe a deputy, a CEO maybe, to really manage the basic operations so that they don't lose control over operations and cash flows in the whole idea of in the whole attempt to create the future. How much premium do you place on that kind of a approach? Does it work?
No, I think the crux of the matter is quite simple. Somebody at a very senior level needs to be paying attention to execution and all the discipline and things that we've just been talking about. It is usually rare that we find a single individual who is able to combine both creativity and disciplined execution. I admire Mr. Biyani for actually trying to develop those skills, because most people are quite happy if they can have even one set, which is really good. One way organizations deal with that is to have a top management team which has complementary capabilities. When a company like Infosys did that very well, I mean, they had 5, 6 or 7 founders, and each founder brought something different to the table. You had a couple of people who were sort of not in the public eye, but were spending all their time really focusing on how to get the job done. So either you have, the kind of multifaceted team of people, or if you're lucky enough to have one person who can sort of combine everything and do it. But in general, I find that's very unlikely to be the case. I mean, even if you take a company like Apple, for example, you had Steve Jobs, who was undoubtedly creative, sort of genius. And then on the other hand, you had somebody like Tim Cook behind the scenes, taking care of the supply chain and making sure that all the execution happened.
In fact, I remember interviewing Ramcharan on this one and asking him about the role of Steve Jobs, and he said, he was in some ways a master orchestra. He would kind of orchestrate that change, and he would kind of bring people together, at least the pieces that were so important for Apple's future. Sanjay, one final question before we kind of wrap up. We're trying to reimagine this whole market driving enterprise, assuming that there will be a powerful pipeline of ideas that will in some ways keep coming, much like what Apple does or what Google does. How far are you from there? Are you already at a stage where you're able to kind of create a portfolio of ideas that you're willing to back for the next 5 years?
I think it's a really difficult question to answer. Are we there? I think we're trying, I would say. But I think one of the big things in my mind that we need to solve for continuously is that we don't know enough as a company and capabilities. And just to link it back to our business of Hotstar and TV. So we are a very good content company. We understand the content and how to create content very well and position it very well. But we are not a technology company. We don't understand technology as well. But in this new world, we need to appreciate and leverage technology as well as our competitors. So I think one of the realization that we don't know enough and we need to build capabilities is a very important part of building the future organization. And it's a journey. I don't think today I can say that we are ready, but this is one area which are clearly very short of today. So if there is one capability we want to build brilliantly, whether through our internal talent or partnerships, is this area of technology. And I think this dimension that we need to build in future would keep changing as we go along this journey. I don't think at any point of time I would be able to say that we are ready today for next 5 years.
Okay, that's a great note to start on, because I think to say that I don't know is a very, very important first step, and that in some ways ignites the need for learning and need for intellectual curiosity and figuring out what's around the corner and learning. So on that note, I'll really like to thank all our 4 panelists for contributing their ideas and sharing some of the leadership lessons that I think would have left us much richer. Disruption is an area that FoundingFuel will keep kind of revisiting and focusing on, because it's a theme that will, I guess, not die very soon. So feel free to kind of, as audiences, send us your questions, and we'll see if there are some that this panel can also take a stab at. But with that, thank you for kind of watching. Thank you, panel members, for being there, Mr. Biyani, Rishi, Rajesh, and of course Sanjay. And we'll keep this conversation going. Good afternoon, and thank you so much.